Hi, and welcome to Vaping in 2025, a prevention short by Prevention Ed. My name is Katie Greeley, and I'm here today to share some of the latest research on vaping and the information you need to know to help keep the students in your community healthy. So, let's talk about vaping. As a public health educator working in substance use prevention for the past 12 years, when it comes to vaping, it can be incredibly irritating sometimes. And what I mean by that is that when we look at smoking data, particularly in the 2010s, around 2014 in the United States and globally, we had the lowest levels of nicotine use among teens than we've ever seen before. We almost had our first smoke-free, nicotine-free generation. Around 2014, 2015, a device that you might remember, Juul, was introduced to a lot of young people, and we saw vaping numbers go up. Young people that would never pick up a cigarette started using a vape, and the result of that now in 2025 is we have more teens using nicotine than we've ever seen before and being exposed to high levels of nicotine than they were previously. So let's look at some of the numbers. This is data around vaping trends for 30-day use. We have the United States, European Union, some countries within Europe, Asia, and Central and South America. Real quickly, if you take a look at the bottom right of your screen, you will see where this data is coming from. Monitoring the Future, that's the US specific survey. SPADS, the European School Project of Alcohol and the Drugs survey. That's for those countries that we see listed in Europe. And then SUP is our Student Substance Use and Peer Perception Survey that we administer here at Prevention Ed. As you can see, right, the vast majority of students are making the healthy choice not to vape, right? Of course, these numbers go up when we look at 1 year and compare it to lifetime as well. But for context, when we compare it to smoking behaviors, in 2014, right, eighth graders, 0.1% of eighth graders had smoked a cigarette, 1% of 10th graders had smoked a cigarette, and 2% of 12th graders had smoked a cigarette. Another good piece of good news is that these numbers are actually down from the peak vaping numbers in 2018. So we continue to apply our approach to prevention, which is that when young people have all the information about risk, they make healthier choices. And that's exactly why we saw these numbers go up. So if we look at public health, right, and what influences behavior, what we know when it comes to alcohol or other drugs and other risky behavior is that when perception of risk goes down, use goes up. And here are the things that young people were hearing when it came to vaping. It's just water vapor. There's no nicotine, right? I love this one. It's healthier than smoking. When we take a moment in the classroom to ask our students, what else is healthier than smoking? Pretty quickly, they get to the point to realize that, yeah, pretty much anything is healthier than smoking. We know as researchers, medical professionals, clinicians, that it's been well established that smoking is one of the worst things you can do for your health, so not a great reason to begin vaping. The design of these products, right, how appealing they are to young children, the flavoring, tropical rainbow blast, blueberry, raspberry, the discreet use, it's easier to use these products than it would be to smoke a cigarette. All of these things have gone into lowering the perception of risk for young people, which when they are making the decision to use or not to use, right, makes vaping a more appealing option than smoking cigarettes. This is what has caused so many young people to pick up a vape when they would have never picked up a cigarette. And so here's what we need to do as educators, right? Here's a wonderful resource. I'll move my head a little bit, called the Stanford Tobacco Prevention Toolkit. It comes out of Stanford. It is one of the best vaping curriculums that we use with our students. I'm going to put myself right here. Excuse me. So to give you a sense of the levels of nicotine young people are being exposed to, right, we can start with a pack of cigarettes. And when we look at a pack of cigarettes, there's about 20 cigarettes worth of nicotine in one pack. That roughly equates to 1 milligram of nicotine per cigarette. When we look at one of the most popular brands at the time, Juul, right, which is no longer a popular brand among young people because they are not allowed to sell flavored products, we were seeing 37 cigarettes worth of nicotine in one pod. Flume or other cylinder-shaped disposable vapes, we see about 363 cigarettes worth of nicotine in one device. And then Elf Bar or Geek Bar, that vape that you saw on the data slide, 590 cigarettes worth of nicotine in one device. Now, we do some quick math. We divide 590 by 20. You get 29.5 packs of cigarettes worth of nicotine in one vape. When I ask my students in the classroom, how many vapes can a young person go through in a week, it's not unheard of that I'll hear an average of students that vape frequently going through one Elf Bar per week, right? I like to tell the students a bit of my history and my story with my nicotine addiction at this point, right? I'm a millennial. I wore skinny jeans. I smoked traditional cigarettes. When I was 16, there was no way in my skinny jeans walking to school I could have my cigarettes in my pocket, right? I couldn't get away with smoking a cigarette in the bathroom. If I left for lunch, right, and I came back to school, I would smell like smoke, like my backpack would get searched. So maybe during my developing years, while my brain was still developing, I was exposed to about 5 milligrams of nicotine per day. And when I think about my recovery and my experience with alcohol, cannabis, nicotine, and other drugs, and when I asked for treatment and I was able to get the help that I needed, and I quit alcohol, I quit cannabis, I quit the other drugs that I had addiction to, I kept smoking for 5 years. And as an individual who is no longer a smoker, who hasn't had a cigarette in 10 years, right, I still experience cravings for nicotine today, 10 years later. So I always kind of give that perspective to the kids, like, my max addiction to nicotine was a pack of cigarettes a habit a day while my brain was still developing. What is 29 packs of cigarettes a week going to do to the developing brain in terms of addiction? Not to mention, another great talking point here with your students is that oftentimes the number one smoking-related illness that students associate with death is lung disease. It's actually heart disease. The number one smoking-related illness that is fatal is heart disease. And nicotine exposure increases an individual's risk for heart disease. Nicotine is a stimulant, right? It increases the heart rate, it increases your blood pressure, and it increases your risk for heart disease. So what are we going to see in 20 years when it comes to vaping and its connection to heart disease? Again, at Prevention Ed, we never lie to our students. We don't know, right? But I'll get back to that in a second, right? Another very powerful slide that we use with our students is this one. So again, this is from the bottom corner. You can see the Stanford Tobacco Prevention Toolkit. Two things I like to point out on this slide: e-cig aerosol composition. Now, we all know that they don't call cigarette or vapes e-cigs anymore. Big Tobacco has a great PR section of their business. Too many people associate cigarettes with cancer, so rebrand vaping, right? It's a vapor. It sounds much cleaner. And what I like to point out is the second word here on the title, which is aerosol. And it's not actually a vapor that people are inhaling when they use vapes. It's not a smoke. It's an aerosol. So think ultra fine, very tiny particles going deeper into the lung cavity, right? Hairspray, Lysol, Febreze. So these particles are smaller than cigarette smoke. That proposes a new risk, right? Chemicals going deeper into the lung cavity. So Stanford tested these products. They tested these vapes. And here are the chemicals that they have found present in these vape aerosols. It's a very popular and impactful slide with my students. Usually it plays out and I let it, but we don't have time, right? So when we look at this screen, usually our students' response is, why is the entire periodic table up on the screen right now? So if you take a look, that first chemical, propylene glycol, that's one of the main ingredients in antifreeze. The very last chemical in the fourth column, rubidium, that is found in fireworks. You can look at the third column, 2 down, acetone. That's one of the main ingredients in nail polish remover. And then going back to the first column, this one is kind of the most jarring chemical that some of my students have a reaction to. The fourth chemical from the bottom, formaldehyde, the chemical that we use to, embalm dead things in to preserve them. So many of these chemicals you see on the screen right now are carcinogens, chemicals that we know cause cancer. One thing that we see on the screen right now that is not in cigarettes are that silver, that nickel, that tin, the titanium. Inside that vaping device, if this is my vape, right, there is a metal coil. And when someone inhales on the vape, right, a microprocessor heats up that metal coil in the device. The E-juice, what they call it, the liquid inside this device, hits that metal coil and turns it into an aerosol. Over time, especially with these disposable vape products, we start to see that metal coil dissolve, and that's where an individual starts to inhale those heavy metals. So here's what I like to do, right, as we come to the end of our time together on our mini vaping lesson. I like to ask my students about the experiment that is currently happening globally, right? And that is, right, many people right now, including young people, are using these vape devices, but we don't know what the long-term health effects are. And as we know, as any part of the scientific method, right, the question is, what are the long-term health consequences of vaping? To be determined, but now many young people are participating in this experiment. When we're testing an experiment, we absolutely need to make a hypothesis, right? And so I ask my students, in 20 years, knowing what you've learned today in our class, what do you believe will be the long-term health effects of vaping? Our students are smart, they get it. Again, what research says is when they have all the information about risk, they make healthier choices. After learning some of the health risks associated with vaping, the chemicals that we're finding in them, the high levels of nicotine, that hypothesis usually ends with it will be just as harmful, if not worse, than smoking. Right? So we have a long ways to go before, right, we have our conclusion. But what we do know is that we are seeing more research on vaping faster than we saw research on smoking. And what we continue to find are higher levels of addiction, right? Higher reports of vaping-related lung injury that we didn't see with smoking, right? And even more chemicals that we're inhaling that were not present in cigarettes that we know the health links are connected to. So again, I re-emphasize, when young people have all the information about risk, they make healthier choices. Helping our students realize that a marketing strategy that has been very effective with big tobacco for decades is that when they lower their perception of risk through marketing, saying that they have a healthier option, go back decades to low tar light cigarettes, which we know are equally as harmful as cigarettes, that vulnerable population for addiction is more likely to reach for that product. And knowing that, for our next prevention short, we are going to cover a increasingly popular nicotine product known as smokeless nicotine. You might be familiar with it as ZYNs. So we're going to wrap today. Thank you so much for your attention and willingness to watch our video to learn a little bit about how we approach the conversation with young people in the classroom. If you want to learn more about Prevention Ed, please email schools@preventioned.org. We would be happy to set up a meeting and a time to share more about our approach, our program, and how we can support your students, parents, and educators on empowering your community to make the healthiest choice. Thank you so much.